So I finally finished up Red Dead Redemption 2 a couple weeks ago, and yeah, it's as good as everyone says. It really sets the foundation for a perfect sequel. It took all the stuff we loved from the first Red Dead Redemption and just ran with it. They deepened the story, further fleshed out the world, improved gameplay, removed some of the more cartoonish and goofy style characters, all while adding a ton of new stuff to do. With all that in mind, it's kind of hard to compare the two titles. Rockstar improves upon just about everything it can over the 8 years between games. They basically updated the first Red Dead and took the if it ain't broke, don't fix it stance. But there was one big area we can certainly compare the games and make it a fair fight. That's with the two main characters, John Marston and Arthur Morgan. On the surface, they're extremely similar. Two no-nonsense Western gunslinger tough guys with troubled childhoods who were taken in by a smooth-talking con man. But once you get to know their characters better and why they make the choices that they do, it quickly becomes apparent that they are two very different people, regardless of the similar lives they've lived. And both of these are great characters, so once I got through the main story, I was pretty torn on which one I thought was the better protagonist. This should go without saying, but big time spoilers for both games, and if I do nitpick parts of either game, which is going to happen, just take it as that. Nitpicking. Just because I play Captain Hindsight or complain about different aspects of either game doesn't mean I'm bashing it. These games are both generation-defining titles and could easily retail at a couple $100 and you'd still get your money's worth out of them. They're both that good. First up is Arthur Morgan, and it's pretty quick to see that he's the muscle of the gang. Whether it's robbing, getting supplies, tricking people out of money, intimidation, or straight up murder, Arthur is their go-to. And as you spend time in camp and get to know the new cast of characters, it's quick to see that everyone really respects and probably slightly fears Arthur. While Dutch and Hosea may call the shots, the rest of the camp knows Arthur's place in the hierarchy is above them too. Speaking of which, I've seen a ton of people refer to Arthur as Dutch's right-hand man, or the second in command, but I never saw him as that. I always pictured Hosea in that role, and Arthur as being kind of more the dirty work guy, or the third voice if Dutch and Hosea needed it. Anyway, when we first meet Arthur, he seems pretty boring. He comes off as a stereotypical foul-mood cowboy, and it seems like a lot of people shared that same sentiment at first too. But once you get away from the mountains, get to relax a little bit, explore the world, spend some time with the other gang members, you really notice that Arthur is the dead opposite of those sentiments. Even though surly is still a great adjective for Arthur, but it's usually warranted. Where at first he comes off as kind of a dick, you start to grasp his personality a bit, and come to see that he's actually got a pretty funny sense of humor and can be really friendly. That is, if he likes you. You do see that loyalty is extremely important to Arthur. He views his gang as family, and the betterment of the gang comes first and foremost. And even though I've already tossed a spoiler warning out there, I do want to give another specific set for Arthur's journal. A lot of players passed over it, or didn't even know that you could go back and read things Arthur writes in there. On top of the in-game plot, you get a ton of hindsight into his actual feelings through his writings. And as it turns out, Arthur is actually a decent writer and artist. But it also turns out that Arthur keeps most of these feelings bottled up inside. Going through and analyzing his entire journal would have to be a whole other video, but to sum it up, Arthur has a whole host of emotions that he doesn't seem to know how to handle. Deep down, it seems Arthur is a really confused and lonely individual. These feelings are why he can't really face the reality that Dutch is more of a manipulative cult leader than he is a father figure. It's why Arthur repeatedly stays loyal to the gang. It's the only life where he actually feels comfortable, and oddly enough, safe. And in turn, it takes the TB diagnosis for Arthur to really look into himself and see that he's been glorifying and making excuses for a life of crime and murder. Before meeting up with Hosea and Dutch, Arthur was raised by a father that he has no kind words for. He does, however, keep a photo of him, albeit a mugshot, hanging next to his bed. When Arthur was 11 years old, his father was arrested and eventually hanged a few years later, to which Arthur was present for. Loyal to the end, even for a father he openly hated. By the time he was 15, Arthur had been taken in by Dutch and Hosea, making him the third member of their newfound gang. From here, Arthur surprisingly turns into a very complex character. Like John, Arthur is far from a good guy, but unlike John, he does inherently have good qualities to him. Arthur does show affection to other people, and while never doing it, does kind of daydream about a life away from crime. As for John, I went into Red Dead 2 a little biased before I even got started. I loved the first one, and it's one of my favorite games ever. Once I booted it up, I couldn't give two shits about this new Arthur guy. All I wanted to do was see what a younger John Marston was like. I knew they brought back Dutch, Javier, Bill, and threw in a bunch of new characters to round out the camp. Didn't care about any of them. I just wanted to see what John was like without him being a zombie or laying next to a barn door. And with John, it really is a tale of two games, And in Red Dead 2, he's, well, John's kind of a piece of shit when we first meet him. And in hindsight, it's a really smart move on Rockstar's part. It separates the player from any subconscious favoritism towards John and pushes them towards giving Arthur a little bit more of a chance to shine. But back to the topic, and yeah, John is a pretty shitty person for about the first half of Red Dead 2. It's obvious very early on that Arthur has an axe to grind with John, whereas the rest of the gang doesn't seem to follow suit. And that's because John broke Arthur's golden rule. He didn't tell anyone, and he just up and left. He wasn't loyal to the gang, and he especially wasn't loyal to his new unofficial wife Abigail and their newborn son Jack. Then about a year later or so, when he came crawling back, everyone welcomed his return like nothing ever happened, much to Arthur's chagrin. The running gag in camp was already that John was secretly Dutch's favorite, and this did nothing to change that notion. It doesn't even stop Abigail from caring about him. Furthermore, we get to see a younger John who in turn doesn't really care about his family. Abigail openly questions his character, the two are almost always arguing in camp, and it's plain to see that he doesn't really give a damn about Jack. There's even a missable scene around the campfire where John rants about having a woman is like a slow death and how much he regrets it. After playing Red Dead 1, all I could think was, the fuck? Seriously? This is the polar opposite of the John Marston we all played as. The John Marston I knew and loved was one of the greatest anti-heroes I could remember. He was a character that didn't give a shit about anything except protecting Jack and Abigail. He constantly threatened to kill people and barely even helped anyone unless it benefited him somehow. But that was always his goal. Every action he made was to keep his family safe and do the government's bidding at any cost of life. I can't stress enough how this is a ballsy move by Rockstar. It really is. Look up any list of the saddest video game deaths and you'll see John Marston on there, and usually pretty close to the top spot. When he was killed, it fucked people up. Whereas with Arthur, the player saw it coming the second the TB diagnosis came. With John, players got lulled into a false sense of security and were completely caught off guard by it. Even during the final mission, players kept retrying the Deadeye part thinking they had to kill everyone and save John. That they got some sort of bad ending. This fell into the same case as reviving Aerith. It just wasn't going to happen, and fans didn't want to accept it at first. They took a beloved character whose only redeeming quality was loving his family, then stripped him of that one redeeming quality. But keep that rant in mind, I'll be coming back to it later after we take a closer look at a side-by-side comparison of the two. John and Arthur both shared essentially the same childhoods. Arthur's parents were around a little bit longer, but his father was a terrible person by all accounts, even if we don't know all the details. John's mother was a prostitute who died during childbirth, and his dad was implied to be what amounted to be her pimp and a big-time drunk. John was orphaned at 8 and joined Dutch by 12, while Arthur was alone by 11 and a founding gang member by 15. Both were raised around crime and likely saw it on a daily basis. Hell, John was supposed to be hanged before Dutch saved him, and that's not even for killing a man he shot prior to that. And that's where these two characters really start getting interesting. It's really a nature versus nurture kind of scenario. If these two characters weren't born into a life of crime, would they have turned into outlaws and murderers as adults? The childhood experiences that these characters shared really shaped them into the men they turned into be. Arthur's father must have been a pretty big piece of shit for him to still hold such contempt while being an outlaw himself. While Arthur only brings up his father a couple of times, you can tell there's a lot of genuine animosity and disdain in those words. I believe part of Arthur's blind eye to his own life of crime was that he never saw himself in the same shadow that he saw his father. Whereas John kind of just rolled with the punches and became an outlaw, Arthur's story still has more depth to it. Before fully committing to the gang, he was engaged to a woman named Mary. Arthur truly did love her, but his life of crime got in the way of that. Eventually, Arthur's double life ended the relationship, as he couldn't choose one side or the other, and the disapproval of her family essentially made that choice for him. Sometime after that, Arthur does have a son with a waitress named Eliza. Even though this wasn't any type of a marriage situation like it was with Mary, Arthur still stopped by every now and then to spend time with his family and support them. He still chose a life of crime, but in his own way still tried to be a family man for a family that he truly did care about, even if he wasn't there often. He lived this life for a few years until one day he went back to visit and simply found two crosses outside. Eliza and his son Isaac were robbed and left for dead. These are the events that truly hardened Arthur and made him further fail to realize the person he had been turning into. He bottled down everything and tried to escape his feelings of loss and fear of change with the camaraderie and freedom of the gang. Now that we have a better understanding on Arthur and his past, this is why he can't forgive John for leaving the gang. Not only did John break Arthur's golden rule of loyalty, but the main reason that John left was because he didn't want to believe that Jack was really his and to be a father to him. It really just keeps getting worse for John, doesn't it? Well, he does get a very slight pass here. When Abigail joined the group, she was a prostitute who had slept with most of the gang members. This is what led John to have his doubts that Jack was really his, and secretly he feared he wouldn't be a good father either way. But also another reason why Arthur has a grudge against John in the first half of the game? Arthur at one point had a thing for Abigail. It's left unanswered if Arthur ever slept with her. He doesn't accept offers from other prostitutes in-game, mind you, but he does write in his journal that he should have married Abigail. Again, we don't know if he even participated in sleeping with her, or if he ever really had a shot. While he writes about it, he also mentions not being over Mary on the same page, so take his marriage proposal with a grain of salt in my opinion. Abigail is head over heels for John, cause even in 1899, chicks dig the asshole. And they have Jack shortly after she joins the gang. It wouldn't leave much time for Arthur, and I always kinda got the friendzone vibe from Abigail to Arthur. He tends to wonder what she sees in John more than a couple times, so sorry Arthur. I believe she might have shot him down and had a thing for John the whole time. Either way, that's a little more insight as to John and Arthur's now distant relationship. So we got a shitload of backstory on Arthur, and we don't get a whole lot on John. I feel like Rockstar did this intentionally to further separate the two characters. Arthur has all this pent-up emotion, and John is the definition of what you see is what you get. For better or worse, he's honest and doesn't have a filter from his brain to his mouth. You might not like what he's thinking or what he does, but he doesn't hide behind anything. He is who he is, and he is that person every day. For as big of a fuck-up as John has been, he does have an odd code. He doesn't even hide murder from Abigail or Jack and faces their disgust head on. Even tries to justify it as simply doing what he's good at. Now it seems backwards after talking about Arthur for the majority of the video, but personally, I think John Marston is the better of the two protagonists. Most people would disagree with me, and I'd say rightfully so. Every reason points to Arthur. His character development, story, and his personality, they're all better. Not to mention his game is essentially an improved version of John's. Hell, on paper, his character is a more in-depth version of John Marston. There's one point that sways me though, and it's that brutal honesty and self-awareness from John that I was just talking about. For better or worse, John knows exactly who he is and what he's about. The real change in him comes from Jack being kidnapped by Angelo Bronte. We get to see that light bulb go off in his head. We get to see him uncomfortably try and become a better father and husband. We get to see a guy who dismissed his family at every angle become protective and realize what's important to him. While Arthur lives with indecision and regret his whole life, John makes a choice. He still screws up a bunch because he is a lifelong screw-up, but it makes the epilogue of Red Dead 2 that much more satisfying when he finally gets it right. Think about it. Is that really so far off from what Arthur wanted before he died? He could have had that life with Mary, but was too indecisive to pull the trigger. He had the opportunity multiple times, but got cold feet each time. At the end of the day, Arthur was really more scared and insecure than anything. He wasn't sure what he wanted, and could never decide either way, so he shelled himself off and stuck to his literal guns. He thought he was too far gone to be anything else. He was most comfortable as the muscle of the gang and didn't realize he made the wrong choices until he was already half dead. Choices that I'm sure Dutch manipulated without Arthur realizing. I think Arthur truly was a good person at heart. It's not even up for debate that he was a better person than John. I believe the angle Rockstar wanted when telling Arthur's tale was that he was born into this life and didn't know or trust anything else. It's why he made all those mistakes and poor choices. When you're surrounded by something, it becomes the norm. And in his case, the norm was being an outlaw, and living anything other than the outlaw life scared the hell out of him. Settling down into society was weirdly more intimidating for Arthur than getting shot at or arrested. The main reason I side with John is because I think his character fits the narrative of the games better. Again, I loved Arthur's character and loved Red Dead 2, and this is just my dumb opinion, but I'm going to nitpick the storyline a little bit here. Rockstar does an amazing job of making you forget that you are playing as the bad guys. Agent Milton is such an asshole and meant to be one of the main antagonists, but everything he says about the gang is true. Arthur and John are extremely likable main characters, but they're both self-admitted murderers and thieves. I feel like Red Dead 1 really gave you the option to play John Marston any way that you wanted. Not that you can't play as low honor with Arthur, but clearly the narrative of the game wants you to play as a high honor good guy. Playing as low honor Arthur just seemed to clash with the story the game was trying to tell. The honor system didn't matter in my opinion. So you see a deer if you're good. Who gives a shit? I'm playing as Arthur Morgan, not Harry fucking Potter. Who cares about the deer? A few different lines of dialogue that really doesn't change anything in the game? Alright. Micah killing Arthur, or Micah almost killing Arthur, then he dies right after, doesn't really matter either. It doesn't change anything. Now, before it comes up, yes, the honor system didn't really matter in Red Dead 1 either, but it wasn't supposed to in narrative terms. It only mattered from a gameplay standpoint. John constantly threatens violence on people and reminds others of his past. He doesn't care what they think of him, or really who he kills, as long as he kills the right people and gets to return to his family. You can be an asshole, or you can help people, and both ways fit the character traits of John and his story that the game is telling. With Arthur, I think they hammed up the whole redemption arc a little bit too much. I know it's in the damn title, but it took me out of the game when Arthur is running around preaching about standing for something and crying about Dutch killing people, when I had killed countless NPCs all game and still achieved the high honor ending because I said hi to enough people while I walked around Saint Denis. Hell, I had side conversations with Miss Grimshaw about Arthur going around and killing people like a maniac, or telling Karen he doesn't know why he's just shooting people and animals for no reason. In a game with such attention to detail, these are details that can't go unnoticed at the end of an otherwise amazing game. I don't need Arthur chastising Dutch for choking out that old lady in Guarma who demanded more gold and pulled out a knife. Fuck her, she was going to rat us out. Arthur acting all high and mighty in those types of scenes didn't really make sense to me. When the story needed Arthur to be a tough guy, he had no issues killing or threatening people. But at the same time, Arthur gets kinda hypocritical when it comes to others in the gang doing the same. I won't say it's flat out bad character writing, but it's certainly inconsistent character writing. This is a little bit off topic, but I feel like the game also missed a subtle but huge opportunity when Dutch kills Angelo Bronte. Yeah, feeding him to a gator in front of everyone is twisted, but he'd already drowned Bronte first. Why did they all look so shocked when Dutch killed a man who set them up and betrayed them? Hell, you see later on with Miss Grimshaw and Molly what the gang rules for betrayal are. People in camp were sad about Molly or mentioned maybe banishing her, but I don't remember anyone flat out saying that killing her was wrong. They all said she knew the rules. Bronte wasn't a part of the gang, but he set them up and betrayed them all the same, which it turns out Molly didn't. Anyway, if you really wanted to play up Dutch becoming more unhinged, maybe they should have had Dutch feed him to the gator while he was still living? At least then when John openly criticizes Dutch, it makes sense. He could say, I know we had to kill him, but you couldn't just shoot him? You had to have him eaten alive? That makes way more sense for John and Arthur to be disgusted by his actions. And I don't want to hear that's crossing the line, because I fed living people to gators playing as Arthur too. The main downfall of Arthur was not seeing Dutch for what he really was. I do think Hosea kept him in check for quite a while, and after he died, it was Dutch running wild without boundaries. Micah didn't help matters either, but it's on Dutch. It really seemed like Hosea was the one stopping Dutch from openly being himself. Even after all the fighting Arthur does, his very last direct line to Dutch is, I gave you all I had. The line before that, more about Micah being a rat. The last line he forces out to both Dutch and Micah, that John made it out. After all the shit that Dutch did, all the threats and infighting, leaving both John and Arthur behind to die during missions, blatantly manipulating the Native Americans for his own benefit, and creating more enemies at every opportunity, Arthur still can't force himself to hate Dutch. I mean, Dutch had Arthur wrapped around his finger, brainwashed even. While some people would say that Arthur couldn't be disloyal, I say there's multiple times over 2 games where John mentions that he knew the kind of person Dutch is, and that the whole gang did. That it was just an excuse to be outlaws and live a life of crime under the disguise that they were fighting civilization and acting against the rich who now own the country. John's Doubts and Scars campfire dialogue is available as soon as Chapter 2. And while at some point the gang may have been more noble, or about as noble as gunslinger outlaws can be, Arthur was the last horse to finish the race. He was the last person in camp to accept that Dutch really wasn't some messiah.
It's gonna be alright, John. We should be going for Jack. We will. We have to move everyone first before that bastard Milton comes back with an army. We ain't no use to Jack in jail. We're at the end of a rope. I don't even know what to think no more. Just gotta keep our cool. Be smart about this. Smart? Are you joking? You made too much noise once again. You drew it right to us. I mean, how many people we killed the past few weeks? Far too many. It's Dutch playing his games. Hosea, too. Get involved with those 2 families. Master con men working their magic. They thought there was a lot of gold. Yeah, they thought there was money. Ain't there all? change what's done. We can only move on.
But one day, we need to start learning from our mistakes.
Come on, it ain't all bad. We've had a rocky run. We'll be okay. We'll get through.
Dutch will fix it. Dutch will come up with a big plan. Right now, every plan gets us into worse trouble. We're getting further from where we're meant to be going.
But you can't put all this on Dutch. You're worked up. Rightly so. Just don't get too far in your head with all this. You'll never get out.
It's a goddamn mess. That poor kid. We chose this life. He didn't.
I don't know. I think this life chose us.
You, me, Dutch, Hosea. It's been a long time now.
Sure has. Lots changed.
I sometimes wonder if things was ever the way we remembered them. If we were ever who we thought we was.
Like I told you, don't go down a rabbit hole with this, Marston. That won't help nothing.
I treated Jack bad. Abigail, too. I didn't want to believe he was mine. You know, when I was lost on that mountain after Blackwater, part of me thought I could just leave again and no one would ever know.
But some wolves thought otherwise. Look, you're here now. This spot we're going in is close to Saint Denis. Soon as we get the others safe, we'll find this Bronte and get Jack back.
As many times as Arthur says how dumb John is, John knew almost the entire time what Dutch was, where Arthur gave him all he had. Sure, he helped John and Abigail get out, but they also tell the story like that's supposed to absolve him of everything terrible he's done, which is still a laundry list of assault, murder, robbery, and property damage, and that's even if you play as High Honor and only do the story missions. And that's what makes this story so unique, is that there really is no redemption for either character. You're both bad guys who lived lives of crime and died painful deaths as a result. At the end of the day, the simplified objective they both shared as their respective redemptions was giving Jack and Abigail a good life away from all the violence, and even that didn't happen. John kinda got out, but never really left his outlaw lifestyle. Once he takes over Arthur's journal, he talks about killing a man for looking at him funny, which is where we start the epilogue. John, Abigail, and Jack on the run and penniless. Nothing changed over the years. Now, John does build Beecher's hope and gets out of the life, but we all know how Red Dead 1 went. It was short-lived because when John finally achieved his goal, the government took it from him and threw him right back into his old life of violence. John fulfills his end of the forced agreement and still ends up dead because of his past. People don't forget. Nothing gets forgiven. John tells Bonnie McFarlane and the player right in the beginning of the first game how the story's going to end. Then to top it all off, Abigail dies only a few years after John, and then all-grown up little Jack turns into an outlaw and murderer as well. The one thing that Arthur and John didn't want. There isn't a happy ending for anyone. Revenge is a fool's game. Revenge is a luxury we can't afford, Arthur would always say, and that's how Jack goes down a darker path. No one achieves redemption. No one lives happily ever after. No one got what they wanted. It's a modern-day tragedy, and a fantastic one at that. At the end of the day, they're two amazing games that tell a very entertaining story. There are so many main and minor characters that influence everything along the way, but the Redemption series is John Marston's story, even if part of it is told through Arthur Morgan's eyes. Well, for what it's worth, that's my take on the matter anyway. If you made it this far, I hope that means you watched the video and you liked it, or, at least you didn't hate it enough to click off. Usually it's just us having some beers and playing some games, so it was a first for this kind of video. Anyway, that's all I've got for you, and once again, if you checked out the video, then I really hope you enjoyed it. See ya!